Thank you all for coming. We do have a great panel today. I think we're going to have a real good discussion, and we want audience questions, so keep that in mind as we're going. I'm going to just briefly tell you the names and titles of our panelists and set up the panel, and then they'll each introduce themselves a little bit more. Our panel is about corporate sustainability programs using data to drive decision making, and what data and tools and metrics are used to drive the right decisions. And there's an old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure, or to put it differently, if you want to manage something and improve something, you've got to measure it. And so that's what this panel is about. It's about taking the data and metrics around sustainability and translating them into action and accountability. And we have 5 great panelists that will speak to how they handle this in each of their companies. So, and I'm going to, so starting here, we have Balaji Jayaseelan, the Senior Manager for Global Energy and Global Environmental and Sustainability at Newell Rubbermaid. And to his right, we have Robert Ferry, the Senior Director of Energy Procurement and the Waste Diversion at Cox Enterprises. And then we have Maury Wolfe, the Director of Corporate Responsibility, Sustainability at InterContinental Hotels Group, IHG. And then to her right, we have PJ Newcomb, who's the Program Manager for Sustainability at Coca-Cola. And on the far end is Scott Tu, who is the founder of the Center for Energy and Efficiency and Sustainability at Ingersoll Rand. And so each of them will just take a couple minutes and talk about who they are and how their company is thinking about sustainability and using data for that purpose. And Balaji, if you want to start, that would be great.
Good morning. Thanks for invitation. And my name is Balaji, and I manage our global sustainability and our utility division at Newell Brands. So if you do not know about Newell Brands, it's pretty much most of the consumer products ranging from pens to car seats to axle blades, we just make it. So it's a kind of, a crazy array of consumer products. And in terms of sustainability, I mean, like, because you're a consumer-facing product as well as you have a professional brand, there's a lot of interface between what the consumer really wants and how you internally try to position yourselves with respect to utilities and beyond than that, and especially with the market space, in terms of how do you position your products, especially on the greener side, so that the consumers understand what you're really trying to position it. So it's an exciting space for us at Newell. And recently, we acquired a company called Jarden, which is pretty much a huge sustainability space as well. They play with it, so it's an exciting time there.
Good morning. I'm Robert Ferry with Cox Enterprises, and just a little bit about Cox. We were founded in 1898, and we're a leading communications, media, and automotive services company based here in Atlanta. We have 60,000 employees. And I'm in the group that's called Cox Conserves, and it's the sustainability arm of the company. And we really have 3 main goals. It's carbon and water neutral by 2044, and zero waste to landfill by 2024. And I also handle the energy procurement for the company. So we do price risk management in deregulated markets. So we're procuring natural gas and electricity for our sites, our facilities. And we also help our colleagues in the alternate energy group. So when we're thinking about renewable projects here in the U.S., we look at the forward markets, whether it's REC values, capacity, and energy, and we help them with those inputs into the models that we have. So excited to be here today, and thank you.
Maury Wolfe with IHG. So IHG is a hotel company, but what's important to know is that across 13 brands, some of you may be familiar with any of our properties from Holiday Inn, Holiday Inn Express, Crowne Plaza, through boutique brands or extended stay brands. We're trying to approach sustainability in the same way. So we approach this globally. We think about how can we reduce the energy and water and waste consumption at each of our properties around the world. But what's interesting for us is that as we do this, it's important to know we're also a franchise company. So we actually don't operate the 5,000 plus hotels that we have globally. So we really have to think about what the business case is for us as a corporate and brand entity, but also what's the business case for our individual owners and operators who are small businesses. We are a group of essentially 5,000 small businesses, and how do we galvanize them around energy and water reductions in a scalable way. So that's what our team focuses on.
Do I have to push the button? No. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is PJ Newcomb, and I'm with Coca-Cola North America, and I'm a sustainability program manager. I work specifically in the energy and climate space, which is one of 4 main areas that we work on in environmental sustainability. In addition to that, we have water stewardship, sustainable packaging, and sustainable sourcing. So my job in North America is to work with our very complicated system. It is also a franchise system. We own some production capability, but largely it's owned by franchisees. Some very small, and some also publicly traded companies on public stock exchanges. So it's a complicated governance activity, but it's one that we work diligently at to achieve our goals in all these different areas. And we have goals from carbon footprint reduction to what some people refer to as our water neutrality goal that you may have heard that we recently achieved 5 years ahead of schedule, and lots of other things. And it obviously demands a lot of data to be managed from a lot of different sources. So thanks for having us this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Tew. I'm with Ingersoll Rand. The global industrial company has a diversity of brands in it, a lot of for the built environment. Many of you may know Trane Air Conditioning, the world's largest commercial HVAC company, cooling large buildings like this one. We also have the historical Ingersoll Rand brands, which are industrial tools and air compression systems used in, now we drive the robotics in many industrial facilities, from food and beverage, such as Coca-Cola, to industrial facilities such as automotive facilities making cars and automobiles. Historically, we invented things like the jackhammer and the rock drill that transformed industries, and so we continue to do that today, except now it's much more what we would know as sustainable ways of doing that. So our focus today is really a value chain approach, which I'll talk about later. So we're focused both on materials, so our material selection is shifting now with our approach to sustainability. We're also shifting how we operate and make the products, and in particular, our focus is more about our customer solutions and how the products are designed to have a life at the end of their cycle, and also how they operate when we install them at a facility.
And to introduce myself, I'm Cliff Majersik, the Executive Director of the Institute for Market Transformation, IMT, which is a nonprofit focused on promoting energy efficiency in buildings based in Washington, D.C., but we're national. And we work with both the private sector companies, large and small, as well as governments, to try to make it profitable to make our buildings more energy efficient. So getting into the questions, as we talked about, data is really how you track your success. And I'm wondering, how do each of your organizations set sustainability goals, and what kind of data do you find most helpful or important in setting those goals? PJ, do you want to take that?
Sure. Well, our goals are set, at least for the company itself, at the corporate chief sustainability office. So it's a very centralized activity, of course, interacting with the different business units. So I mentioned I work in the North American geography. That comprises 2 business units, the US and Canada, and there's about 18 business units globally. And so the chief sustainability office works with those business units in different parts of the business to come up with the goals, things that are first starting with activities and areas of impact that are material to the company. Water, as you can imagine, is a very material thing to Coca-Cola. It's our key ingredient, and it's a critical resource that we share with all the communities in which we operate. And so it starts first with that really high-level check. What is it that we're doing that is an impact to the environment that we have impacts on, that we can control and make a difference in? So it starts with that first check. But then obviously you've got to get into, when you're getting into the specifics of your goals, for example, we had a goal to replenish the water we use in our beverages, 100% of that by 2020. You've got to determine, what does that mean? How much water does that mean? And what does that define? And as it turns out, in North America alone, it's something like 30 billion liters a year. So you've got to know this before you get yourself on a track to implementing this. Because it takes a lot of resources and a lot of coordination to do that. So, the data is important, but we don't let the data lead the conversation, but it is an important part of it. And so you can imagine same things happening in energy and climate, where we have a goal to reduce the carbon footprint of the drink in your hand by 25% by 2020. And that's a value chain goal. You mentioned a value chain, and so that's everything from our ingredients and packaging to the manufacturing, distribution, and cooling of the beverages. And so again, managing that, and that's something I have the privilege of doing, is wrangling all the data that's related to that and seeing what levers we can pull. So data is important, but we don't put the cart before the horse.
Scott, do you want to?
I was just going to say, I agree, data is really important. Good data is very different from bad data or estimates. You know, I think most of us were used to, up until recently, of having to estimate, make assumptions about certain things. But today we've either developed tools or we've had partners like some in this audience here today who provide much better data to us. For us, it's greenhouse gas reductions. That's a proxy for sustainability. We have 56 indicators we set at the global corporate level, but predominantly it's around measuring reductions in greenhouse gases. We do CO2 equivalents, but it's greenhouse gas for both the supply chain, for how we operate our facilities, as well as for our products and Scope 3 emissions.
I would agree as well. I mean, data is very important. I mean, when you think about water, electricity, natural gas, and waste, that's a lot of information. We've got over 32,000 accounts across the country, so that's a lot of dynamic information that's all across our divisions. And I think about the zero waste to landfill effort especially. I have responsibility for that. And looking back 3 years ago, we didn't have any information. Electricity, natural gas, we were in very good shape. We partnered with Urginet several years ago to get our arms around that so that we could set those goals, those MBOs, year in, year out. But the zero waste to landfill was a tough one because we had really never captured the data and information in our sites. What assets on the ground did we have? What recycling were we doing? We really didn't know. We partnered with a company to get that information, that billing data. And so now we have that in a portal. We have the ability to give that feedback to our locations, to our sites. And now we have ranking of those locations. And so now it's about a conversation with our sites, some of our senior leaders, about what they can do and engaging our employees to accomplish those goals.
I think the other thing that's important about data when it comes to goal setting is how you use it to influence the appropriate goals for your market. You know, at IHG, one of the things we learned, so we have a carbon and a water reduction goal per occupied room. And the water goal is specifically in water-stressed areas, since water is obviously difficult to move, as Coke will tell you. So you know, we want to focus our efforts in the locations that matter most. But the other thing that it does for us is it allowed us to focus on what we ascribe to in the shared value construct. So it allowed us to focus on reductions that provided environmental benefit, but also provided a business value. Energy is the number 2 line item on a hotel P&L. So if we can encourage them and find ways to drive them to reduce their energy, whether or not they ascribe to a sustainability value set, they ascribe to their bottom line. So we immediately had a great business case if we were focused on a per occupied room metric. The other side of that was that applying the goals in this way really influenced our customer base. Our accounts, both our individual guests, like we hope you are, or our key accounts, are starting more and more to want to know what is the environmental impact of my head in a bed. You know, what's the carbon footprint of my night stay? What's the water footprint of my night stay? So when our goals match that, when we're doing a carbon and water reduction goal on a per occupied room, we're also able to feed the data in exactly the same way that our customers are looking for it. So it really connects the business case for our owners and operators who are looking for not just the sustainability piece, but what's also the business driver here.
In terms of Newell, we take more like a life cycle approach because of our consumer-facing brands. Like, for example, you could probably look at it in terms of a report. We have greenhouse gas emission goals, which is like a science-based goals, which we have from our 2015 baseline, as well as waste reduction to landfill. But then we take a little bit above approach because manufacturing is pretty much like 30 to 40% of our overall impact of our product. And the end of life is where, like, for example, our greenhouse gas emission gets the biggest impact, or from a material side, there is a very big impact. So how do we create like more like a circular economy based on our product line is what we kind of look in terms of goals and collect the information based on it. I'll just give you a very quick example for that. We make storage containers, Rubbermaid food storage containers. the biggest impact is the plastic that goes into the container, but if you really look in terms of from a life cycle perspective, it's also about how much consumers are throwing away that plastic after a single use or a couple of uses. So we have to really understand, like, okay, how can I make these containers much more reusable? And then the other aspect is like, how do I make my consumer reuse these containers at the same time have the balance of the price point which they want, and also make it dishwasher safe? Because if you look at from the energy standpoint of your greenhouse gas, the energy that is consumed when hand washing is much higher than actually dishwashing. So how do you kind of balance the entire greenhouse gas perspective in terms of packaging? So materiality analysis is what PJ said. It's a very important element for us. How do we set our strategy? And based on the strategies where we get like more like from a science-based goals, like 20 to 30% of CO2 reduction by 2020, kind of aligns with the Paris Agreement for us.
So that actually raises an interesting question. Are you actually trying to make some sort of firm estimate of how much the carbon footprint of people washing the product that you sell is, and,
Yes.
and your impact on that?
So we do life cycle assessment based on a category level. So we would know exactly how much as a pen or how much like a food storage container or a Calphalon container that you actually buy consume the amount of energy, and what's the factory footprint based on it. There is also the biggest, for us, the challenges comes with make versus buy. Some products we actually make which will have a firmer control compared to a scope 3 element where we might not have much of a control over there. So that is where once you know your category level, then you can influence your sustainability decisions and your strategy can be based on that.
So one common theme I heard is that a lot of you are trying to account for your supply chain. And do you have platforms that you ask all of your supply chain partners to participate in to report their metrics for you to track and roll into your larger calculations? And is that a challenge to get your supply chain partners to do that? And do you find trends in terms of who participates well and maybe who you have more trouble persuading?
One of the things that I don't think we're the only company, but we at Coca-Cola ask about 150 of our global suppliers to participate in CDP or the Carbon Disclosure Project, and they've added a water module as well recently. We haven't really embraced the water module just yet, but on the Carbon Disclosure Project, it's a standard way of reporting data. The next step, of course, is asking them and convincing them the value of allocating the emissions and emissions reductions to Coca-Cola, which then that even gets challenging to feed into our global goals of the carbon footprint in your hand reduction, because then we need to slice and dice it by geographies, because that's how we do our carbon footprint reduction. But we use CDP, but I say we're tiptoeing into how that can be a good, solid, and reliable data feed with some accuracy that we can depend on for what we're trying to do with it.
We're also using tools like CDP to do evaluation of strategic partners. We're attempting to try not to invent a new tool because we're all saturated with tools, I think everyone here. So we would rather use CDP and others. 85% of the listed companies in the US are currently using CDP. So these are good proxies and tools that exist with data that's already there that you can access.
So for us, we take a little bit of a different approach. So we think about this in two ways. We report through CDP, but largely we use this because we are the supply chain that people are asking questions of. Because we are a franchise estate, we have very limited data about how our franchisees are making their purchasing decisions. So where we can influence and guide suppliers, we certainly do. But the role we play here is much more that companies are asking us as their supply chain, what is the carbon footprint? So we report through a variety of indices. CDP is one of them. There's several others depending on what the customer is looking for. But it's, particularly for companies that have a very small footprint of their own, service-based industries, their travel is largely their carbon footprint and their water footprint. So we have a great opportunity there to highlight our sustainability goals and our sustainability progress as a way to help be part of their solution. So it's a little bit of a different shift for us. The other way we approach data is when we look at how our franchisees are operating and how can we understand what they're doing and help guide them through solutions so that they can continue to reduce their footprint. And to do that, we built a tool called Ihg Green Engaged. So we built it in-house for our properties. So it's really geared for our general managers to log in, and it's our way to track both all of their utility data, their progress against reductions in this space so that we can help them set bespoke targets based on how they're currently performing against comparable hotels and what opportunity they have for reductions. And it's our way that we provide about 200 what we call green solutions to help them figure out what's the right behavior to go after these carbon, water, waste reductions. So when we think about supply chain, it's more about how we can help our own estate be a better part of someone else's supply chain.
You know, we currently don't report into CDP. We spent a lot of time thinking about our locations, our division or sites, you know, making sure they understand the goals and a strategy and a plan to help them get there. Here recently, we've spent a lot of time last couple of years on the supply chain piece, and we've had sustainability summits with our vendors, and that's been a really tremendous thing for us to sit down and have roundtable discussions with our vendors about how we think about the environment and how we think about you know, these different components, waste, water, and energy. And we've got, I'll tell you, several examples of companies coming back to us and said, you know, after that summit, we went back to some of our leadership and we talked to them and said, this is what Cox is doing, and can we implement a program? And that's what we said, even if it starts out with something small, maybe it's an energy program, you concentrate on one segment. That's a start, and it's really been received very well with our suppliers and our vendors.
For us, in terms of supply chain, what we are currently tracking is our transportation emissions. We don't own any trucks, so we basically source most of it's a third-party sourcing. So we do have goals behind that, and we report these numbers externally. But beyond the scope 3 elements of our transportation, we don't track right now our supply chain emissions from our, for 480 to 500 suppliers, which we call more strategic suppliers with it. Currently, their program is more tied around the social element piece because most of our suppliers are based in Southeast Asia. And however, the goal for us is to move forward, is to capture the emissions from them. But this is the only exception which we have is when we actually do a life cycle impact on a category, which I mentioned before. If the particular product is actually a buy category from them, we actually track that particular emission. Apart from it, we don't actually do that.
How do you all track progress and measure progress, both quantitatively and qualitatively, against your sustainability goals?
So I mentioned this tool, Ihg Green Engaged. It's the way that we get the data, and we're also able to see how every single one of our properties is performing. So what we're trying to drive them towards is, of course, our global targets, where we have these 12% carbon and water reductions. But in order for each of those properties to feel like they really have a stake in it, I mentioned earlier, we need them to have a goal that makes sense for them. Those that have been along the sustainability journey with us for many years, staying flat or a 1% reduction may actually be a pretty challenging target for them. They may have done a lot of sustainability things already. For those that we're still pulling along a little bit, they may find 10% reductions just by changing out the light bulbs next year. So what Green Engage allows us to do is look at both what solutions have they already completed, how are they currently performing year over year, month over month, and how are they doing against a benchmark of hotels so that we can help them set an annual target that makes sense for that particular property. So it's really a great way that we can take something global and make it feel bespoke for each individual property across all of the brands. I think one of the interesting things in this space is that the measurement of success is not only the operational numbers, but what we have lovingly started to call our 11th green solution. And we call it that because we recently started a brand standard that requires every single one of our properties to participate in Ihg Green Engaged to a minimum level. We want everybody to at least get started in the tool. And the requirements are that they complete a set number of 10 green solutions, and it's what we call level 1 certification in the tool. And what we're measuring as success is the properties that are seeing that quick return on investment, seeing the value of participating in sustainability, and going on to do the voluntary 11th solution. So we're really tracking what does it mean when we've engaged them past just the company requirement. Currently, we're seeing about 80% of them are going on, so we feel like that's a really good indicator that they're seeing value in both the bottom line journey, but also the environmental journey.
Does that tool actually calculate the return on investment for your
It
hotels?
does. It's a little, for the data junkies, you'll probably groan, but it's a little bit crude because we do have a tool that is for 13 brands and 100 countries. So calculating a return on investment for every single solution is a bit of a challenge, but it gives them an approximate range of return on investment for 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years. Interestingly, in hospitality, our properties really go through refurbishment every 7 years. So projects that have a longer return on investment are off the table. Our owners will never consider them. So we really have to focus on those short-term wins.
We've really got two main platforms right now. It's the energy dashboard, and that's really housing our water, natural gas, and electricity. We get our data feed actually from Urginet. And the other piece is the waste and recycling. And we've got a portal from our waste provider where we get that information. And what we do is we work with each of our divisions on, and waste in particular, I'll talk a bit about that, giving them a biannual update on where they stand. So diversion rate is really the driver about zero waste to landfill, and that's always the first question. Do I have to really get down to 0%? Have you seen what's in the trash can? I mean, how do we do this? Now, zero waste to landfill is a 90% diversion rate, so reuse, recycle, repurpose, at least 90%. So 10%, there's some difficult to deal with materials, so we understand that. But that's sort of the first conversation. And then we sit down with each of the locations and we look at what do you have, what are the materials, what are the waste streams, and where do you stand today? So what's the current state? So they may be at a 35 or 40% diversion rate. Where do we feel like we can get them to next year? And in fact, we had a meeting with the division last week to do that. They've got about half of their locations that are below 50%. So the goal is next year in 2017 is to get those 50% to 50% diversion rate or better. And we have a ranking system and an award level as you get towards zero waste to landfill. And I'll have to give a shout out to our Atlanta Journal-Constitution, who reached zero waste to landfill last year. And they were the first newspaper in the United States to achieve that. So we're very excited about that accomplishment.
That's great. You mentioned the dashboard. Who's looking at that dashboard and how often are they looking? And is that something that comes up during evaluations for managers?
So we've got an energy procurement team that looks at the dashboard. We also have other engineers, other folks in our group that have access to pull that data. So those are the people that are looking at information. And we do have access or give the passwords codes to our locations who have interest in gathering that information and data. But what we found is you typically don't have a lot of that. It's more of pushing a report out to the locations divisions. We find that more helpful, more of a succinct report, because when you look at what's in the dashboard, kVAR, kilowatts, I mean, it's confusing if you don't know those terms and what they mean. So we try to put that in something that they can understand and make sense to them.
PJ, how do you measure progress against sustainability?
Well, we also have what we call a CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer's dashboard. It's a quarterly, or a scorecard, actually, I think they call it. And, with the 18 business units, each one of them is tracked against their goals and against each other. So it's pretty obvious which business units need some extra attention maybe, or some resources. And then that flows down to the business units, and then down below the business units, we can just drill in and see which bottlers, that's what we call our franchisees, which bottlers are how they're doing on the various metrics, and the common ones are, the energy, water, waste. But we also have some of the social metrics on there as well, because our goals are me, we, and the world. So it's not just environmental sustainability, but we can do drill downs, and we have lots of different tools. It can sometimes be a little challenging. The connectivity of those tools isn't as robust as we would like sometimes. And we've got everything from Excel spreadsheets to dashboards and Tableau and maps and great things, but there's an accountability that's driven to each business unit through that process.
You raise a good point about having information on all these different silos and locations, and we're actually working on a project now. The code name internally is called EDUP, but that's bringing all of that information, fuel, waste, water, electricity, natural gas, all together in one portal silo, so that we can gather all that information in one location, so that it's not towards the end of the year everybody is reaching and searching for those Excel spreadsheets and things like that. So we're excited about having that completed here soon.
In terms of Newell, we use a couple of tools. Basically, we incubated a startup in 2012, focusing on descriptive and predictive analytics, mainly focusing on utilities and manufacturing. So we collect information pretty much like all others, like energy, water, waste. The way which we set goals is that, at a corporate level, because of the disparate band structure which we have, we normalize by sales or we normalize by cost of goods sold. But when we actually get down to the manufacturing, the normalizer actually change depending upon the product line that they make. So we have different normalizers which will drive the performance at a plant level, so that if somebody is saying that I've reduced my energy by 5%, but what does it really mean by what is the common denominator that they have, so that we can track performance within that particular brands. And moving further, for some plants which the maturity scale might be a little bit more higher, so we would generally ask them to be sub-metered to a level where we can look in terms of their peak demands and trying to understand what sort of alternative technologies is available in case if there is a discounted cash flow for us, a kind of the financial model that we employ for those kind of plants. So it's a combination of everything. It's pretty much how the goal setting process goes. There is a maturity level, as Maury was mentioning, very different from different plants, but we're really trying to come back and really centralize everything together so people can exchange projects, share best management practices with each other, and try to see where they can go as next level.
Scott, how do you measure progress?
Well, we set the targets at a business or brand level, and that is tracked on a monthly basis around the world, 800 plus offices, 60 plus manufacturing facilities. So a sizable footprint. There's 56 KPIs that I've already mentioned, so that's tracked at a brand level, but it's aggregated at the corporate level. And there is a CEO review quarterly with the CEO. His direct reports have also a quarterly review, and so we finally almost connected all of these trackers and dashboards together. Our energy procurement team, working with Fellow McCord, one of our partners, looks at a different type of dashboard than what the CEO and his team may see, but everything is aggregated up to the quarterly level at a quarterly level.
How often is your CEO looking at this?
Every quarter.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you're the person that's crafting what your CEO sees?
Correct.
And talk about, how do you craft something, with the CEO's perspective in mind? Obviously, the sort of biggest picture perspective.
Right. Yeah, so what's happened with us is that there's sort of several filters. One is it must be material. So we don't really focus on issues unless they're material, and we use a formal process for deciding what's material. We use Deloitte as a partner to do a materiality assessment to ensure both qualitatively and quantitatively what's most material. Those things are then become a dashboard. From that, we figure out which of those we can set public targets on. Public targets are great because they're public, and many times they're absolute. And then thirdly, that's also how we prioritize projects internally. So it gets down to that project level. So when Waco, Texas facility wants to do a solar upgrade, and they are lower on the priority list because they may be the most efficient plant already, that helps us decide how we allocate capital dollars and make the investments from an ROI standpoint. So we use that sort of cascade of decisions to set the dashboards and also to feed it back at the CEO level.
And do you run any public targets by your CEO before making them?
Absolutely. He sees them all.
So PJ, I know you have an interesting story about presenting to your C-suite.
We've talked a lot about the most common, I think, sustainability metrics that we all deal with, energy, water. These have solid costs related to them, right? If you save 1 million kilowatt hours at 10 cents kilowatt hour, there's $100,000 in your pocket, and you can justify a project to pay that back in the 2 years or 3 years, whatever your hurdle rates are. What we're having challenges with is what I might call a sustainability unicorn, and it's this top line value. You know, how do you value things that are a little less tangible? I was recently presenting to the leadership in North America a new sustainability innovation, and we had some business case, some pretty hard numbers in there that we had on what the sales would be and what it would cost. But we also put in there, you know, what's the increase in brand trust, and what about the potential to win new business? I mean, these are not easy to do, and I literally put up there, I had a smiley face with a dollar sign in front of it. I mean, and I knew that it was something positive, and to make sure they knew it was positive, it was green. I made it green, right? So I made the font green and bolded it. I don't know if that helped, but it actually, it did work. I mean, they smiled at that. It worked in a way that it got their attention and said, yes, we agree that we can't put hard numbers on that, and but they recognize there's a value there. And so we're just in that space where we think it's a kind of the next frontier of sustainability, is trying to build these top line understandings. We've been participating in a group called Monetizing Sustainability, and we're trying to crack that code, and it's not easy. So anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think whether you're monetizing it or not, which is very interesting, but that piece that is more of the human feel-good, going above and beyond the Call of Duty element is critical here. And one of the lessons learned we had is that we so focused on what the bottom line and top line results were of all of these projects, we thought that was the argument to make. So we actually took all of the feel-good side and just, you know, put it on the back burner, so we don't even need to talk about it, because it is just so fundamentally a smart business case that we didn't need to explain those pieces. And what we saw is that our community investment programs were skyrocketing, which had no monetization associated with them, while our other programs, you know, Green Engaged, we were really having to sell this business case over and over and over again. And it was because we really missed connecting this piece that when it comes to employee engagement, when it comes to asking operators who are, you know, running a hotel and they've got a soccer team coming in and they've got 4 people who think they're VIPs and want to be treated as such regardless, and they've got a plumbing issue, if we're asking them to do something outside of their normal call of duty, we need to also connect what's the inspiration for them that is not just dollars and cents. So I think whether it's the C-suite knowing there's something there, or whether it's our operators who want that inspirational connection of why they're going above and beyond, that piece of sustainability is pretty fundamental. We've got to figure out how to crack that code more often.
Yeah, I believe we're very fortunate at Cox. We have just tremendous support from the Cox family. I look back at 2007 when Jim Kennedy, he was the CEO at the time, he's now chairman of the board, but he's the grandson of the founder of the company. And he says, I want you to come up with a platform, an initiative that speaks about our company. I want to leave my legacy. And from that point on, we've just built the program around you know, what he was looking for. And he spoke last week to a leadership group, and he talked about, that's what's neat. At all leadership meetings, Cox Conserves, the sustainability program, always has some sort of place in the program. But he talked a lot about that and what it meant to him, engaging 60,000 employees and empowering them to do good things and have a positive impact on the environment. So I think having that support at the senior level has really made it great and a lot of fun.
In terms of from a C-suite level, number one primary driver for us obviously is the cost. So we kind of don't use the word sustainability within our company much. It's more like, what's your energy cost in terms of our overhead costs and how much SG&A reduction that we can bring it to the company as a value. So I know it's a very crude way to say, but that's kind of the driver that has been for us in terms of how we bring about products. And then in terms of engagement, which is also seen very, very actively at the C-suite, we have where every quarterly newsletters from all the different facilities globally, they can track what are the things that they're actually doing in terms of the community impact, in terms of local impact. Could be on sustainability, could be another way around. And as a result, from the last 2 years onwards, we have one dedicated complete day apart from what quarterly, whatever the facilities wants to do, it's a complete day of service. So you can choose one whole day within your, including the CEO will be a part of it. So we are part of that as a part of the sustainability thing. So it could be going to schools, helping them to recycle better, or basically going to be teaching them, to all the way facilities where they can do what they would like to do. So it's been, I would say, like, I would say a growing pains from changing the model from how they view costs to sustainability to go beyond than that for us.
Well, I think we have time now for a couple questions from the audience. Does anyone want to ask our panelists about their experiences?
Here's one.
Go ahead, please.
Wait for a mic, because we're recording this.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm Oliver Daleson from International Corporate Creations. I'm curious to hear the panel's opinions on the importance or the relative importance of timeliness and frequency of data, given that most of what you've been talking about is essentially annual plans or even longer term.
Anyone want to take that?
So we look at data monthly, and timeliness is always a challenge for us. We look at it monthly, but we're actually looking at typically 3 months in the rears, because largely for our water bills, our hotels only get them quarterly. And it poses a constant challenge for us because it means we are influencing, information 3 months behind. It also poses some challenges with our own reporting. So we're using this data to feed into our RFPs, for example, so that our key accounts know what the footprint of the different properties is. And it's all dated. So it both impacts our ability to act operationally in a timely manner and for us to give the most up-to-date information. So it is a challenge for us. Some of our properties work around it and use some bill payment services and some metering, and others don't quite have that ability in terms of just bandwidth or cost. And so they wait, but I think everybody's always looking for the silver bullet on how to get the most real-time data.
And I think it depends on who's looking at the data and what they're using it for. At the business unit level, a national level, where we have over 100 manufacturing facilities, 10,000 trucks, yada, yada, yada. I can't look at real-time facility level data. I do not have the mental capacity. Even if someone were to make 3D holographs of the most important thing, I can't react in time to get something done at the facility level. Now that would be great for the facility person, right? Who can do something about understanding, well, we didn't run last night, but yet it looks like we left the whole plant on and running. What are we doing? So I think you need to match the frequency to what you need. But having the ability to have at least monthly data is a good thing, at least from a governance perspective, from what we're trying to do at a business unit level. And also need to think about the variabilities that come in on a monthly basis. Our business does have seasonal fluctuations, and if you just look at that month's data, you can't just take that in a vacuum, right? You need to compare it to, wait a minute, what happened last year? What happened last month? What does a 12-month rolling average look like? Are we trending in the right direction? So I think it's good, but it's got to be appropriately done.
And your plant managers, they do have access to daily utility information?
Some do, some don't.
I see.
Timeliness of data is important for us as well, especially in our automotive group. We have what's called a system called Engage and Ihg, and what that is data and information that comes from the major load centers, and we gather that information, and it's in talking about that visibility and something that is easy to understand. It has a dial and needle that tells if they're in a good spot or a bad spot, but basically gives them an indication as far as their usage. So they can look at that and see if they're in the green or the red, and start to make some decisions about the operation rather quickly. So that information is very important. And timeliness makes all the difference. But I also would say is, that monthly, that information that's accurate and up to date is very important as we look at our sustainability projects. We have model that that information goes into. It's a financial model. We have a peer review. We have IRR targets. So all of that information has to be up to date and accurate and market current.
It also depends upon what's the attribute of the data that you would like to collect and what frequencies. Like, for example, we collect, like as PJ and Maury saying, that kind of consumption data, it's okay for a month. But if you're going to play with demand data, it's better to collect because you're trying to game the utility system in 15-minute rolling average in US. So you collect real-time information so that you can game your processes so that you would be able to change that processes so that you don't hit that 15-minute rolling average. So it really has to do a lot with in terms of where geographically you're set up and should real-time data matter at that particular processes or not. In certain processes in ours, we prefer real-time data, especially in US sites where they have 15-minute rolling averages, so that we can game the system. But in other sites where you have, in Mexico, where they would have off-peak hours at 4 to 6 o'clock, you don't really need to have much of a real-time. You could probably take an hourly information and you can game around it. It's just the importance of what are we really trying to change with respect to the data, rather than having the data and trying to influence what needs to be done.
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm John Fiella with Smart Energy Decisions, and I'd like to pick up on something that PJ referenced. PJ, you referenced your interaction with facilities, and from our point of view, the sustainability, facilities, and energy management all need to be aligned to really make things happen. Can you talk about the nature of your respective interaction with the energy managers at your companies, and who has what role and who drives initiatives? And
Okay, great, thank you. So I mentioned a little bit about the complications in the way that Coca-Cola is organized and that we're a franchise bottling system largely. So really, because these are independently run operations, we have to go through a layer of ownership and management at these franchisees. And so I interact with the franchise bottlers with pretty good frequency. But then I can't reach through them into their facilities. I'm happy to assist with that if that's what they desire. So it's a coordination at that level. And so it can make things challenging, of course, but that's where communication is really key. And so we try to align at that level. And of course, the bottler's energy or sustainability lead will then interact with their facilities that are under their control and under their footprint. Because when it's really a franchise system, it's out of our control, but within our sphere of influence. So it's a fine balance. It's a good question.
We have time for one more question. Right here, please.
Hi, several of you, I'm sorry, I'm Tanya Hernandez at Acuity Brands. Several of you mentioned the CDP, getting information from your vendors and suppliers. I was curious as to whether how much you trust that data, and do you have trouble getting that data from your suppliers? Are there challenges that are surround that in order for you to pull your picture together?
The good news or bad news about CDP is it's publicly available, so you can query the database. You can also hire outside firms to collectively give you reports. We do both. So it's not hard to get on whether you trust it. I mean, it's self-reported by companies, but there are trends over years. So you can get multiple years of the data and see if there are shifts or anomalies in the data. So I think for the most part, it's trustworthy. We trust it and find it to be a good tool, and it continues to gain credibility, I think, in the marketplace.
And we're working to increase our participation, our response rates from suppliers. Mm-hmm. So we're about, until this past year, I guess 2015, we were about the average response rate. Our supply chain had about the average response rate, but we did a little bit of a coordinated push this year to try to get that response rate up. So not all of our suppliers are responding. Some don't understand what it is. Sometimes you get bad emails. You know, it's just like any other system. It's something you have to keep on top of. But I think the data we do get, we feel pretty good about.
All right, well, if you could all join me in thanking our great panel.